The last thing my father said to me before he hung up the phone was, "Don't come crawling back to us when you're hungry, Elena. You made your bed in the dirt, now sleep in it." That was 5 years ago. I can still hear the coldness in his voice. It wasn't just anger. It was disgust. To my father and my mother, poverty was not a circumstance, it was a disease. They believed that if you didn't have a certain amount of zeros in your bank account, you weren't just unlucky, you were unworthy. I sat on the edge of my bed that day, still wearing my simple white wedding dress. I was crying. I had just married the love of my life, a man named Mark, but my parents weren't there. There were no expensive flowers. There was no string quartet. There was just Mark, holding my hand, his knuckles slightly rough, his fingernails never quite free of engine grease. "It's okay, Elle," he had whispered, wiping a tear from my cheek with his thumb. "We have each other. That's all the wealth we need." I believed him. But I didn't know then that the universe has a very funny way of balancing the scales. I didn't know that the man my parents called a peasant and that nobody was holding a secret that would eventually bring their world crashing down. But before I tell you about the ending, I have to tell you how it started. I have to tell you about the dinner that ruined my relationship with my family forever. I grew up in a world of golden cages. My parents, Richard and Sylvia, were wealthy. Not just comfortable, but wealthy in a way that makes you forget how normal people live. We lived in a massive estate with gates that kept the rest of the world out. My mother spent her days at the country club, worrying about wrinkles and gossip. My father spent his days in boardrooms, worrying about stocks and his reputation. They had my life planned out for me since I was a little girl. I was supposed to go to a prestigious university, get a degree that sounded good on paper but didn't require hard work, and then marry a man from a good family. A man like the son of my father's business partner. But I was always the black sheep. I didn't care about the fancy galas. I hated the stiff, scratchy dresses my mother forced me to wear. I preferred reading books in the garden to networking at parties. I met Mark by accident. I was 24. I was driving my father's convertible, a car I was terrified to scratch, when the tire blew out on a lonely stretch of road. I stood there, looking at the flat tire, completely helpless. I had never changed a tire in my life. A battered old pickup truck pulled over. Out stepped a man in blue coveralls. He had messy dark hair and a smudge of oil on his cheek. "Need a hand?" he asked. His voice was calm. Deep. That was Mark. He changed my tire in 10 minutes. He didn't ask for money. He didn't ask for my number. He just told me to drive safe. But there was something about his eyes, so kind, so honest, that made me ask him for coffee as a thank you. Coffee turned into dinner. Dinner turned into long walks. And within 6 months, I knew I loved him. Mark was a mechanic. He loved old cars. He loved taking things that were broken and making them run again. He was simple. He lived in a small, clean house near his workshop. He didn't care about brand names. He wore plain t-shirts and jeans. When I finally told my parents I had met someone, they were thrilled. "What does he do?" my mother asked, her eyes lighting up. "Is he in finance?" "Law." "He works with cars," I said. "Oh. A dealership owner?" my father asked. "No," I said, taking a deep breath. "He's a mechanic. He fixes them." The silence in the room was so loud it hurt my ears. My mother put down her teacup. It made a sharp clink against the saucer. "You're joking," she said. Her voice was flat. "I'm not. I love him." "Elena," my father said, his face turning red. "You are not bringing a grease monkey into this house." But I did. I insisted. I wanted them to see the man I saw. I wanted them to see his heart. So, a week later, I brought Mark to dinner. It was a disaster from the moment we walked through the door. Mark had dressed up. He wore a button-down shirt and nice slacks. He looked handsome to me. But the moment my mother saw him, she looked him up and down like he was a stray dog that had wandered onto her expensive carpet. My father didn't even shake his hand. We sat at the long dining table. The servants brought out soup. Mark waited for everyone else to start, trying to be polite. "So, Mark," my father said, not looking up from his soup. "Elena tells me you fix cars for a living. How much does a job like that pay these days? Enough to afford a suit like that?" I froze. "Dad, please." "It pays enough, sir," Mark said calmly. He didn't get angry. "I make an honest living." "Honest?" my father scoffed. "Honest doesn't pay for a mortgage in this neighborhood. Honest doesn't pay for vacations in Europe. Do you have any ambition, son? Or do you plan to be under a car for the rest of your life?" Mark put his spoon down gently. "I take pride in my work. There is value in working with your hands." My mother laughed. It was a cruel, high-pitched sound. "Value? Darling, look at your hands. They are permanently stained. You can't scrub that kind of low class away." I slammed my hand on the table. "Stop it. Both of you." "No, Elena," my father stood up. He pointed a finger at Mark. "This boy is looking for a meal ticket. He sees a rich girl and thinks he's won the lottery. Well, I won't have it. If you choose him, you choose this life of his. And you lose ours. No inheritance. No trust fund. No access to the properties. Nothing." He looked at me with eyes of stone. "Make your choice." I looked at Mark. He wasn't looking at the floor. He was looking at me. He wasn't asking me to leave. He wasn't asking me to stay. He was just waiting. I stood up and took Mark's hand. "I choose him," I said. My voice shook, but I meant it. My father turned his back. "Get out. And don't call us." We walked out of that mansion, and I felt a strange mixture of terror and freedom. I left behind millions of dollars that night. I left behind my luxury car. I left behind my family. For the first few years, it was hard. Not because we were poor, we weren't. But because of the silence. My parents kept their word. They didn't call on my birthday. They didn't call on Christmas. I adjusted to my new life. I worked as a teacher. Mark went to his shop early every morning and came home late. We lived in his small house. It was cozy. We cooked dinner together. We laughed. It was a simple life, but it was real. But my parents, they made sure I knew they were watching. Sometimes, I would hear from old friends that my mother was telling people I had run off with a beggar. She told people I was living in squalor. She painted a picture of me as a tragic failure. Occasionally, I would see them in town. They would look right through me, as if I were a ghost. They would get into their luxury sedan, dressed in their designer clothes, and drive away without a backward glance. It hurt. Of course, it hurt. They were my parents. But there was something about Mark that I didn't fully understand back then. He never complained about my parents. When I cried about them, he would just hold me and say, "Don't worry, Elle. The wheel always turns." He was always busy. He spent a lot of time on his laptop in the evenings, looking at spreadsheets. I assumed he was managing the accounts for the auto shop. I never asked too many questions. I trusted him. I didn't know that while my parents were busy spending their money to look rich, Mark was busy using his money to actually become rich. 5 years passed. Then, the economy shifted. The market took a dip. Rumors started flying around town that my father's business wasn't doing well. I heard whispers that they had to sell the summer house. Then the boat. I wanted to reach out, but Mark told me to wait. "They aren't ready to be humble yet," he said. He was right. One afternoon, I was grading papers at our kitchen table when my phone rang. I looked at the screen and nearly dropped my pen. It was my mother. I stared at the phone for a long time before answering. My heart was pounding in my chest. Was someone sick? Was someone dead? Why else would she call after 5 years of silence? I picked up. Hello? Elena? Her voice sounded different. It wasn't the imperious, commanding voice I remembered. It sounded thin. Nervous. Elena, are you there? I'm here, Mother, I said, gripping the phone tight. We need to talk, she said. Your father and we are in a bit of a situation. We were wondering if you and Mark would like to come for tea. Tea. After 5 years of treating us like garbage, she wanted to have tea. I didn't know it then, but that invitation wasn't about reconciliation. It was a trap. And it was the beginning of the end for them. Mark drove us to my parents' estate in his truck. It was a clean, reliable truck, but compared to the vehicles that usually lined my parents' driveway, it looked out of place. My stomach was in knots the entire ride. I kept twisting my wedding ring, a nervous habit I had developed over the years. Mark reached over and covered my hand with his. His palm was warm and rough. Just breathe, Elle, he said softly. We are just going for tea. We don't need anything from them. Remember that. They have no power over us anymore. He was right, but old fears run deep. When we pulled up to the iron gates, I noticed the first crack in their perfect image. Usually, the gates glided open silently, oiled and maintained by a staff of groundskeepers. Today, they groaned. A loud, metallic screech that echoed in the quiet afternoon. As we drove up the long, winding driveway, I looked at the lawn. It was green, but it wasn't the manicured velvet I remembered. There were weeds poking through near the flower beds. The fountain in the center of the roundabout, a massive marble structure that used to spray water 24 hours a day, was dry. Looks like they let the gardening staff go, Mark noted, his voice neutral. He wasn't gloating. He was just observing. We parked. The front door opened before we even reached the steps. It wasn't the butler, Charles. It was my mother. She was wearing a Chanel suit, but I recognized it. It was from a collection 3 years ago. Her hair was perfectly coiffed, but there was a tightness around her eyes that makeup couldn't hide. She looked tired. Elena, she said, offering her cheek for a kiss. She didn't hug me. And Mark. She said his name like it was a word she was tasting for the first time and didn't like. Hello, Mrs. Sterling, Mark said politely. He stood tall, shoulders back. He didn't look intimidated. We were ushered into the formal drawing room. It was cold inside. I realized they hadn't turned on the heating, despite it being a chilly autumn day. My father was standing by the fireplace, swirling a glass of scotch. He looked thinner. His suit hung a little loose on his frame. Well, he said, turning to face us. The prodigal daughter returns. Hello, Dad, I said. We sat down. The tension was so thick you could choke on it. My mother poured the tea herself. There were no servants in sight. The silver tray held a packet of store-bought biscuits, arranged in a circle to look fancy. I remembered the days when our chef would prepare fresh eclairs for tea. So, my father began, sitting in his leather armchair. I suppose you're wondering why we called. It has been 5 years, I said quietly. Yes, well, my mother interrupted, forcing a tight smile. Families have their squabbles. But your father and I have decided to make some lifestyle changes. Strategic changes. Mark took a sip of his tea. Strategic? The estate is too big for just the two of us, my father said, waving his hand dismissively. Too much maintenance. We've decided to sell. We want to be in the city. Closer to the action. I knew immediately this was a lie. My father loved this house. He built his identity around it. Selling it wasn't a choice, it was a necessity. We've secured a lease in the new Sovereign complex, my mother said, her voice raising an octave, trying to sound impressive. It's the most exclusive building in the city. Penthouse suites. Concierge. Very elite. They don't just let anyone in, you know. They run background checks. Financial audits. She looked at Mark pointedly. I don't suppose you've heard of it, Mark? It's not really in your circles. Mark placed his teacup down slowly. A tiny, unreadable smile touched the corner of his mouth. I've heard of it, Mark said. Nice building. Good foundation. Nice? My father scoffed. It's architectural brilliance. It's where the city's top brass are moving. We managed to secure a unit on the 40th floor. We move in next month. That sounds wonderful, I said, trying to be supportive. I'm happy for you. Yes, well, my father cleared his throat. He looked at his scotch glass. The move requires a significant deposit. First and last month's rent, plus a security fee. It's quite standard for luxury real estate. He paused. The room went silent. I saw Mark's eyes narrow slightly. The thing is, my father continued, avoiding my eyes. Our assets are currently illiquid. Tied up in overseas investments. The sale of this house will take a few months to close. We need to secure the apartment by Friday. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. They didn't call to reconcile. They didn't call because they missed me. You want money, I whispered. My mother stiffened. We don't want a handout, Elena. Don't be vulgar. We are offering you an investment opportunity. A short-term loan. We know you have your teacher's salary, and... She looked at Mark with disdain. I suppose the garage brings in some cash. We need $50,000. You'll get it back with interest once the house sells. I was speechless. The audacity was breathtaking. They had disowned me for marrying a poor man, and now they were asking that same man to bail them out. Let me get this straight, Mark said. His voice was dangerously calm. You want to borrow $50,000 from us to pay the deposit on a luxury apartment that you can't afford? We can afford it, my father snapped. It's a cash flow issue. Temporary. And don't speak to me about affordability, boy. You probably haven't seen $50,000 in your entire life. I started to stand up. Dad, that is enough. We are leaving. Sit down, Elena, Mark said. He didn't move. He just looked at my father. So, the Sovereign complex. That's where you want to live? It's where we belong, my mother said. Unlike this life you've chosen. Mark nodded slowly. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out his phone. He tapped the screen a few times. 50,000 is a lot of money, Mark said. Especially for a mechanic. We know it's a stretch for you, my father sneered. Mortgage your little house if you have to. Take a loan. We are your family. You owe us this respect after the embarrassment you caused us. I felt tears stinging my eyes. Embarrassment? We are happy, Dad. We are happy and we are debt-free. Can you say the same? How dare you, my mother hissed. It's okay, Mark said. He put his phone away. He looked at my parents with a look I had never seen before. It wasn't anger. It was pity. I can't give you $50,000, Mark said. My father's face turned purple. Then why are you still sitting here drinking my tea? Get out. Both of you. Useless. Mark stood up. He buttoned his jacket. I can't give you the money, Mark repeated, because I don't think you should sign that lease. The management there is very strict about late payments. I don't need real estate advice from a grease monkey, my father shouted. Mark took my hand. Come on, Elena. Let's go home. We walked out. My parents were shouting insults at our backs as we reached the front door. You'll regret this, my father yelled. When we are back on top, don't expect a dime. We got into the truck. I was shaking. I put my head in my hands and started to cry. I can't believe them, I sobbed. They haven't changed. They are drowning and they are still trying to stand on our heads to breathe. Mark started the engine. He didn't say anything for a mile. Then, he reached over and turned on the radio, low. Mark, I said, wiping my eyes. Why were you smiling back there? When they mentioned the sovereign complex? Mark kept his eyes on the road. He shifted gears. Because, he said quietly. I know the owner. You do? I asked. Who is it? He glanced at me, a mischievous glint in his eye. You're looking at him. I stared at him. The streetlights flickered past us, casting rhythmic shadows across his face. You own the sovereign? I whispered. Mark, that building is worth millions. How? When? Mark sighed, a long, heavy sound that seemed to release years of tension. He pulled the truck over into a quiet parking lot and killed the engine. The silence of the night wrapped around us. He said, turning to face me. I've been working since I was 15. I didn't just fix cars. I listened to the people who owned them. I learned about real estate from a guy with a '67 Mustang. I learned about zoning laws from a city planner with a broken transmission. He took my hand, his thumb rubbing over my knuckles. 10 years ago, I bought a rundown duplex with my savings. I fixed it up myself at night. I rented it out. Then I bought a fourplex. Then a commercial lot. The auto shop is my passion, Elena. It keeps me grounded. But the real estate? That's my business. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. I wasn't angry, just stunned. We lived so simply. I thought we had to. We don't have to, he said softly. We choose to. I didn't tell you at first because I wanted to be sure you loved me, not the portfolio. And then, when your parents cut you off, when they treated you like trash because they thought we were poor, I wanted to prove something to myself. I wanted to prove that we could build a happy life without their money. And we did. Tears pricked my eyes again. So, we're fine, he smiled. We're very, very comfortable. And the sovereign complex? I own the holding company that manages it. My name isn't on the front door, but I sign the checks. I laughed. It was a hysterical, bubbly laugh that came from deep inside my chest. My parents are trying to move into your building. They are, Mark's face grew serious. And I'm going to let them. What? I stopped laughing. Mark, they can't afford it. You heard them. They need a loan just for the deposit. I know, Mark said, his eyes hard. But if I deny their application now, they'll just find another victim. They'll spin a story about how they were treated unfairly. No. I'm going to approve the lease. I want them to see what their arrogance costs them. They want the high life. I'll give it to them. Let's see if they can pay the price. The next few weeks were surreal. I watched from a distance as my parents' life unraveled and then hastily stitched itself back together. They managed to sell the estate, for far less than it was worth, rumors said, to a developer who planned to tear it down. That must have killed my father. They took the cash from the sale and, instead of paying off their debts or finding a modest home, they used it to secure the lease at the Sovereign. Mark handled everything through his management team. He gave strict instructions, treat Mr. and Mrs. Sterling like any other tenant. No special treatment. No waivers. I remember the day they moved in. I drove past the building. It was a gleaming tower of glass and steel, rising high above the city. I saw the moving truck. I saw my mother standing on the sidewalk, pointing her finger at a mover, shouting directions. She looked like a queen surveying her new kingdom. She had no idea her peasant son-in-law owned the pavement she was standing on. A month went by. My phone remained silent. They didn't call to thank us for the visit. They didn't call to tell us they had moved. They were back in their bubble, pretending we didn't exist. But Mark got updates. Your mother complained about the concierge today, Mark told me one evening over dinner. Apparently, he didn't open the door fast enough. She called him incompetent. Another week passed. Your father tried to park in the VIP spots reserved for the penthouse owners. He doesn't have a penthouse, he has a standard 2-bedroom on the 40th floor. He made a scene when they towed his car. I shook my head, cutting a slice of lasagna. They are digging their own grave. They are, Mark said. And the dirt is about to hit the fan. The second month rolled around. This was the moment Mark had been waiting for. The new money from the house sale had dried up. The lifestyle they were trying to maintain, the dinners, the clothes, the appearance of wealth, was burning through their cash reserves. On the 5th of the month, Mark's property manager, a sharp woman named Sarah, called him on speakerphone while we were in the living room. Mr. Reynolds, Sarah said. We have a situation with Unit 4004. The Sterlings. Go ahead, Sarah, Mark said, leaning back in his chair. The rent check bounced, she said. Insufficient funds. I covered my mouth. It had happened faster than I thought. Did you contact them? Mark asked. Yes, sir. I called Mr. Sterling. He was quite abusive. He told me it was a bank error and that I should learn who I was talking to before I harassed him. He threatened to have me fired. Mark's jaw tightened. I see. He said he knows the owner personally, Sarah added, her voice hesitant. He said he and the owner are old golf buddies and that I would be on the street by noon if I asked for the money again. Mark looked at me. A dark, resolute look crossed his face. He doesn't know the owner, Mark said into the phone. But he's about to meet him. Sarah, issue the 3-day notice to pay or quit. Standard procedure. Posted on their door. Yes, sir. The next 3 days were agony. I kept waiting for my father to call me, to beg, to scream. But he didn't. His pride was a fortress that trapped him inside. When the 3 days were up, they hadn't paid. It's time, Mark said. He stood up and put on his best suit. Not the mechanic's coveralls. A dark, tailored charcoal suit that fit him perfectly. He put on a crisp white shirt and a silk tie. He looked powerful. He looked like the man he actually was. Are you coming? He asked me. I stood up. My hands were shaking, but I nodded. I wouldn't miss this for the world. We drove to the Sovereign complex. This time, we didn't park on the street. Mark pulled his truck, which he still drove, despite his wealth, right up to the valet stand. The valet, a young man who knew Mark well, rushed over. Good evening, Mr. Reynolds. Good to see you, sir. Evening, Jason. Keep it close, Mark said, tossing him the keys. We walked into the lobby. The marble floors shone under the chandeliers. The concierge, a man named David who had been yelled at by my mother, looked up. His eyes widened when he saw Mark. Mr. Reynolds, David said, straightening his tie. We weren't expecting you. I'm here to handle an eviction, David, Mark said calmly. Unit 4004. David's face broke into a small, relieved smile. The elevator is waiting for you, sir. I'll alert security to stand by. We stepped into the elevator. The numbers ticked up. 10, 20, 30. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would crack my ribs. Mark, I said. What are you going to say? The truth, he said. The elevator dinged at the 40th floor. The hallway was plush and silent. We walked down the corridor until we reached unit 4004. There was a bright orange piece of paper taped to the door. The eviction notice. It had been ripped in half, but the tape still held the pieces there. Mark didn't knock. He pulled out a master key card. "Ready?" he asked me. I took a deep breath. "Ready." He swiped the card. The light turned green. The lock clicked. Mark pushed the door open. My parents were sitting in the living room. My mother was on the sofa, clutching a glass of wine. My father was pacing, shouting into his cell phone. "I don't care what the system says. Transfer the funds. I am Richard Sterling." He stopped when he saw the door open. He spun around, his face red with rage. "Who the hell do you think you are, barging in here?" he roared. I told that incompetent manager that. He stopped. He saw me. And then he saw Mark. Mark stepped into the apartment. He looked around the room, inspecting the walls, the floor. Then he looked at my father. "Hello, Richard," Mark said. His voice was ice cold. "I heard you were looking for the landlord." My father blinked, confused. "What? What are you doing here? How did you get in?" "The security in this building is supposed to be." "I have a key," Mark interrupted. "Because I own the building." The silence that followed was heavier than anything I had ever felt. It sucked the air out of the room. My mother dropped her wine glass. It shattered on the hardwood floor, red wine splashing onto the expensive rug. "You." My father stammered. He looked at Mark's suit. He looked at the confidence in his stance. "You, what?" "I own the Sovereign Complex," Mark said, taking a step forward. "I own the holding company. I own your lease. And you are 3 days late on your rent." Mark pulled a folded piece of paper from his inside pocket. "And since you threatened my staff," Mark said, "I am personally delivering your eviction notice." For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the drip, drip, drip of the red wine soaking into the beige carpet. My father's face went through a kaleidoscope of colors. First white, then gray, then a deep, mottled purple. He stared at the eviction notice in Mark's hand as if it were a loaded gun. "You're lying," my father whispered. His voice trembled, stripping away all his usual bluster. "This is some kind of sick joke. You? A grease monkey? You fix carburetors. You don't own skyscrapers." Mark didn't blink. He didn't raise his voice. He simply walked over to the coffee table and placed the paper down gently, right next to my father's cell phone. "I fix carburetors because I enjoy it, Richard," Mark said. "I own this building because I made smart investments. Unlike you." My mother finally found her voice. She scrambled up from the sofa, ignoring the wine on her shoes. She looked at me, her eyes wide and frantic. "Elena. Tell him to stop this nonsense," she pleaded. "Tell him who we are. We are the Sterlings. We don't get evicted. We are dignitaries in this city." I looked at her. Really looked at her. For the first time in my life, I didn't see the powerful, terrifying matriarch who controlled my childhood. I saw a desperate, aging woman in a suit she couldn't afford, begging for a status she no longer held. "You aren't dignitaries, Mother," I said softly. "You're tenants. And you haven't paid your rent." "We are family," my father shouted, suddenly switching tactics. He took a step toward Mark, puffing out his chest. "You can't do this to family. After everything we've done for you." Mark laughed. It was a short, dry sound. "Everything you've done for us?" Mark asked. "You mean when you called me a peasant at your dinner table? Or when you cut your daughter off without a penny because she married for love? Or maybe you mean the 5 years of silence while you waited for us to fail?" We were testing you," my father stammered, sweating now. "It was a test of character. We wanted to see if you could make it on your own. And look. You did. You succeeded. He tried to smile. It was a grotesque, terrifying expression. So really, my father continued, his voice taking on a wheedling, salesman tone, we are the reason you pushed yourself. We inspired this. We should be celebrating. Let's forget about this rent business. Consider it a family discount. We can start fresh. I felt bile rise in my throat. The manipulation was so blatant, so shameless. There is no family discount, Mark said. My tenants pay on time. My tenants treat my staff with respect. You have done neither. Mark checked his watch. You have 24 hours to vacate the premises, he said. If you are not out by tomorrow evening, I will have the sheriff here to remove you. And Richard? The security team has been instructed to escort you out if you cause a scene in the lobby. You ungrateful little, my father lunged forward. Mark didn't flinch. He just stood there, solid as a rock. My father stopped inches from him, realizing that physically, he was no match for a man who lifted engines for a living. I suggest you start packing, Mark said. He turned to me. Ready to go, Elle? Wait, my mother cried out. She rushed forward and grabbed my arm. Her grip was tight, her fingernails digging into my skin. Elena, please. You can't let him do this. We have nowhere to go. The house is sold. The money is tied up. If you throw us out, we will be on the street. We are your parents. I looked down at her hand on my arm. The diamond bracelet she wore was fake. I could tell by the way it didn't catch the light properly. Another illusion. I remember when my tire blew out, I said quietly. I was stranded on the side of the road. I was scared. I called you, Dad. Do you remember? My father looked away. I called you, I continued, my voice gaining strength. And you told me you were in a meeting. You told me to call a tow truck and stop bothering you with minor inconveniences. You left me there. I gently peeled my mother's fingers off my arm. Mark stopped, I said. Mark saved me. Mark gave me a home when you took mine away. He is my family now. And I stand by him. Elena, she shrieked. Goodbye, mother, I said. We walked out of the apartment. Mark closed the door firmly behind us. We could hear my father screaming incoherently on the other side, throwing things against the wall. The walk down the hallway was silent. My heart was racing, but my head felt strangely clear. When the elevator doors closed, cutting off the noise from the hallway, I slumped against the wall. Mark immediately put his arm around me, pulling me into his side. Are you okay? He asked. I don't know, I admitted. I feel heavy. But also light. Is that make sense? It makes sense, he said. It's grief. You're grieving the parents you wished you had, not the ones you actually have. We rode the elevator down to the lobby. When the doors opened, David the concierge was waiting. He looked nervous. Mr. Reynolds, David said. There was a noise complaint from 4004 already. I know, Mark said. They are leaving tomorrow, David. Keep an eye on the cameras. Make sure they don't damage the fixtures on their way out. If they break anything, bill it to their deposit. If the deposit doesn't cover it, send it to collections. Understood, sir. We walked out into the cool night air. The city lights were dazzling. I looked up at the massive building, the Sovereign Complex, stretching up into the stars. I thought about my parents up there, in their empty luxury, packing their bags in shame. I thought it was over. I thought that was the end of it. They would leave, disappear into the woodwork, and we would finally be free. But I underestimated how much venom my parents had left. The next morning, I woke up to my phone buzzing incessantly. It was buzzing so hard it was rattling off the nightstand. I groaned and rolled over. It was 6 a.m. Who is it? Mark mumbled, still half asleep. I picked up the phone. I had 50 notifications. Text messages from friends I hadn't seen in years. Facebook tags. Instagram DMs. I opened one of the messages. It was a link to a video. My stomach dropped. "Mark," I said, my voice sharp. "Wake up." He sat up instantly. "What is it?" "My father," I said, staring at the screen. "He went to the press." I clicked play. The video was a news clip from a local tabloid station. The headline in bold red letters read, "Wealthy landlord throws elderly parents onto the street." And there, on the screen, was my father. He was standing on the sidewalk outside the Sovereign complex in the middle of the night. He had rumpled his clothes to look disheveled. My mother was standing next to him, dabbing at dry eyes with a handkerchief. "He owns the whole block," my father was shouting into the reporter's microphone. "My son-in-law. A secret millionaire. And he's evicting us, his own flesh and blood, because of a simple banking error. We are elderly. We have health conditions. And he is throwing us out like garbage in the middle of winter." The reporter, looking sympathetic, turned to the camera. "A shocking story of family betrayal and corporate greed. Is this the face of the new housing crisis? We will have more at 11. I dropped the phone on the bed. "They are trying to destroy you," I whispered. "They are painting you as a monster to save their own reputation." Mark picked up the phone. He watched the video. His face didn't show anger. It showed focus. "They want a public fight?" Mark said, standing up and walking to the closet. "They want the world to judge us?" He pulled out a file box from the top shelf. "They forgot one thing," he said. "I kept the receipts. All of them." By noon that day, our quiet life was effectively over. The story had gone viral. People love a villain, and my parents had painted Mark as the ultimate villain, the greedy, heartless landlord stepping on the necks of the elderly. I made the mistake of looking at the comments section on the news site. Disgusting. How can a son treat his family like this? Boycott his business. Let's see how he likes being broke. This is what happens when poor people get money. They forget where they came from. I felt sick. Physically sick. I sat at the kitchen table, clutching a cold cup of coffee, watching news vans pull up outside our front gate. They were camped out, waiting for a glimpse of the monster landlord. Mark's auto shop was getting flooded with calls. Fake appointments. Prank calls. Threats. He had to close the shop for the day to protect his employees. "This is a nightmare," I whispered, burying my face in my hands. "They win. Even when they lose, they win. They've dragged us down into the mud with them." Mark was standing by the window, looking out at the reporters through the blinds. He wasn't shaking. He wasn't crying. He was incredibly still. "They haven't won, Elle," he said quietly. "They've just made the biggest mistake of their lives." He walked over to the table and opened the file box he had brought down earlier. He spread the papers out. "Your father thinks he controls the narrative because he shouted the loudest," Mark said, tapping a stack of papers. "But he forgot that in my business, we document everything. Every interaction. Every email. Every threat." He pulled out a USB drive. "And," Mark added, his eyes dark, "he forgot about the cameras." "What's on there?" I asked. "The truth," Mark said. "Not the story they told the cameras, but the reality of who they are." Mark called a contact he knew, an independent journalist named Sarah who had done a piece on his restoration work years ago. She was honest. She cared about facts, not just sensationalism. He invited her over. We snuck her in through the back garden entrance so the news vans out front wouldn't see her. We sat in the living room. Sarah set up her recorder. "Tell me your side," she said. And we did. We didn't scream. We didn't cry. We just laid out the timeline. I told her about the day I brought Mark home. I told her about the disownment. I told her about the 5 years of silence. I showed her the lack of birthday cards, the lack of calls. Then, Mark took over. He showed her the lease agreement. He showed her the bank statements proving the check had bounced. But that's just business, Mark said to Sarah. They claim I'm evicting them for a simple error. They claim they are innocent victims. But I have a duty to protect my staff. Mark plugged the USB drive into the TV. This is from the security camera in the lobby, Mark said. 3 weeks ago. The video played. It was high definition. There was no audio, but the image was clear enough to break your heart. It showed my mother standing at the concierge desk. David, the young concierge, was handing her a package. My mother grabbed the package, looked at it, and then threw it back at him. It hit him in the chest. She was screaming, you could see the veins in her neck. She pointed a finger in his face, poking his chest aggressively. Then, the video cut to another angle. My father, in the parking garage. He was blocking 2 parking spots with his car. A security guard approached him politely. My father got out of the car and shoved the guard. Hard. The journalist, Sarah, watched in silence. Her eyes were wide. That's assault, she whispered. We didn't press charges because they were family, Mark said. We gave them a warning. We told them to treat the staff with respect. They responded by threatening to have the staff fired. Mark paused. I didn't evict them because they were poor, Sarah. I evicted them because they were abusive. And I won't let anyone, not even family, abuse the people who work for me. Sarah nodded slowly. She closed her notebook. Can I have a copy of this footage? She asked. Yes, Mark said. But please, blur the faces of my staff. I don't want them dragged into this. Sarah left. For 6 hours, nothing happened. The reporters were still outside. The hate comments were still rolling in. Then, at 6 p.m., the story broke. It wasn't a tabloid piece. It was a headline on the major news network's website, the real story behind the viral eviction, abuse, assault, and lies. The video footage was embedded right at the top. I watched the view count tick up. 1,000. 10,000. 500,000. The internet, which had been so ready to crucify us, suddenly stopped. It pivoted. And then, it turned its rage in the other direction. The comments changed instantly. Wait, she threw a box at him? Who does that? He shoved a security guard? That's assault. These aren't poor victims. These are entitled bullies. That poor son-in-law. He tried to help them, and they spit in his face. The transformation was swift and brutal. My parents had wanted public attention. Well, now they had it. But not the kind they wanted. Around 8 p.m., the news vans outside our gates started to pack up. They weren't interested in harassing us anymore. They had a new target. Mark's phone rang. He looked at the caller ID. He didn't answer. He just showed it to me. Dad calling. He's calling, I said. Let it ring, Mark said. It rang again. And again. Then my mother called. Then my father again. Finally, Mark picked up the phone. He put it on speaker. What do you want, Richard? Mark asked. Take it down, my father screamed. He sounded frantic, like an animal caught in a trap. Take the video down. Do you know what you've done? People are canceling their memberships at my club. My partners are pulling out of deals. We are being ruined. You ruined yourself, Mark said calmly. I just turned the lights on. We will sue you, my father shouted. We will sue you for defamation. It's not defamation if it's true, Richard, Mark said. And the video is public record now. It's out of my hands. Elena, my father yelled. Elena, talk to him. We are your parents. You are destroying us. I leaned close to the phone. I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. The fear was gone. The guilt was gone. You destroyed us 5 years ago, Dad, I said. You just didn't notice because we were too quiet to complain. Now, you're hearing the noise. We have nowhere to go, he sobbed. It was a fake, manipulative sob, but it was edged with real panic. The hotel just canceled our reservation because of the news. We are on the street. I looked at Mark. He nodded at me. It was my choice. There is a motel on Route 9, I said. The Lucky Star. It's cheap. It's clean. And they take cash. I suggest you go there before they see the news, too. A motel? My mother shrieked in the background. I am not staying in a roach motel. Then sleep in your car, I said. Goodbye. I hung up the phone. The silence in the room was beautiful. Mark walked over to me and wrapped his arms around my waist. He rested his chin on my shoulder. You okay? He asked. I think so, I said. I think I'm finally free. But the story wasn't quite over. We had won the battle, but the war leaves scars. And there was one final surprise waiting for us, one that would close the chapter on my parents forever, but not in the way I expected. A week later, a letter arrived in the mail. It wasn't from my parents. It was from a lawyer. Not a lawsuit. A notification. My heart hammered as I opened it. Mark stood next to me, reading over my shoulder. Dear Mrs. Reynolds, the letter began. We are writing to inform you regarding the estate of your late grandmother, Beatrice Sterling. I froze. Grandma Beatrice? She died 10 years ago. Her estate was settled. Read on, Mark said, pointing to the next paragraph. It has come to our attention, during a recent audit triggered by the bankruptcy filing of Richard Sterling, that a trust fund was concealed. A trust fund left specifically for you, Elena, upon your marriage. I gasped. What? Your father was the executor, Mark read. He was supposed to transfer the funds to you 5 years ago. He never did. I dropped the letter. My father hadn't just disowned me. He had stolen from me. He had stolen the inheritance my grandmother left me, likely to fund his own failing lifestyle, all while calling my husband a thief and a beggar. Mark picked up the letter. His eyes were cold steel. Well, Mark said. It looks like we aren't done with the lawyers just yet. The word embezzlement is a heavy, ugly word. It sounds like something that happens in movies, not in families. But as we sat in the lawyer's office the following week, surrounded by mahogany bookshelves and the smell of old paper, that was the word that hung in the air. It's quite clear, the attorney said, sliding a thick binder across the desk. Your grandmother left you a substantial trust. It was meant to vest the day you got married. Your father, as the trustee, forged your signature on a release form. He transferred the funds into his personal accounts 5 years ago. Almost to the day. I felt cold. Bone deep cold. He used my grandmother's money, I whispered, to buy the fancy cars? To pay for the country club? To look down on us? Essentially, yes, the attorney said. He was living off your inheritance while mocking your husband's poverty. Mark reached over and took my hand. His grip was tight, grounding me. What happens now? Mark asked. We sue, the attorney said. And because forgery is involved, there will likely be criminal charges. It's a felony, Mrs. Reynolds. I closed my eyes. I thought about my father. I thought about his pride, his arrogance, his desperate need to be seen as a king. And now, he was going to be remembered as a thief. Do it, I said. The months that followed were a blur of legal motions and depositions. My parents tried to fight it, of course. My father claimed it was a misunderstanding, that he was managing the money for me. But the paper trail didn't lie. They lost. They lost everything. To pay back what they stole, the court ordered the liquidation of their remaining assets. The jewelry, the designer clothes, the few stocks they had hidden away, it was all seized. They avoided prison only because of their age in a plea deal that left them with a permanent criminal record. They were no longer the distinguished Sterlings. They were pariahs. The country club revoked their membership, not because they were poor, but because they were felons. Their friends stopped returning calls. They were exiled from the world they worshipped. I didn't go to the final hearing. Mark went for me. I stayed home, in our garden, planting tulips. I needed to touch the earth. I needed to create something beautiful to counter all the ugliness. When Mark came home, he found me on my knees in the dirt. He didn't say a word. He just knelt down beside me and helped me cover the bulbs with soil. "It's over," he said softly. "Where will they go?" I asked. I hated that I still cared. I hated that a small part of me still worried about the people who had tried to destroy us. "They moved into a small apartment on the south side," Mark said. "It's a rough neighborhood. But it's what they can afford with their social security." I nodded. I wiped a smudge of dirt from my cheek. "Do they hate us?" Mark looked at me, his eyes full of a wisdom that always amazed me. "They probably do," he said. "But their hate can't touch us here. We built this life with love. They built theirs with lies. The wind always blows the house of cards down eventually." I thought that was the end of it. I thought I would never see them again. But life has a way of giving you one last look, just to make sure you've learned the lesson. 6 months later, winter had settled over the city. It was a gray, biting cold. I was driving downtown to meet Mark for lunch. He had just finished closing a deal on a new commercial property, and we were going to celebrate. I stopped at a red light near the bus station. It was a part of town I rarely visited, concrete, gray, and weary. I looked out the window, watching the people huddled in their coats, waiting for the bus. And then I saw her. My mother. She was standing by the bench. She wasn't wearing her Chanel suit. She was wearing a puffy, beige coat that looked 2 sizes too big for her. It looked like something from a thrift store. She was holding 2 plastic grocery bags. She looked small. The woman who used to terrorize waitresses if her salad dressing was wrong, the woman who refused to hug me because it might wrinkle her silk blouse, she looked like a gust of wind could blow her away. She was staring at the ground. She looked tired. Defeated. Beside her, sitting on the bench, was my father. He was staring blankly at the traffic. He looked old. The arrogance was gone from his face, replaced by a hollow, bitter sag. The light was still red. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel. A sudden, fierce impulse rose in my chest. I could roll down the window. I could shout at them. I could scream, "Look at me. Look at my car. Look at my life. I won." I could get out and throw money at them, just to humiliate them the way they had tried to humiliate Mark. I watched them. My mother shivered and pulled her coat tighter. My father said something to her, and she snapped back. They were miserable. They were together, but they were alone. The light turned green. I didn't roll down the window. I didn't honk. I didn't shout. I just eased my foot off the brake and drove forward. I drove past them without turning my head. I left them there on the corner, in the cold, with their plastic bags and their bitterness. And in that moment, I realized the greatest revenge wasn't screaming. It wasn't gloating. The greatest revenge was happiness. It was driving away to meet the man I loved, with a heart that was light and free. It was realizing that they didn't take up space in my head anymore. They were just 2 strangers at a bus stop. I arrived at the restaurant. Mark was waiting for me at a table by the window. When he saw me, his face lit up. That genuine, warm smile that had captivated me when he was just a mechanic in blue coveralls. I sat down and took his hand. "You look different," he said, studying my face. "You look lighter." "I saw them," I said. Mark didn't have to ask who. He squeezed my hand. And nothing," I smiled. "I just kept driving." Mark smiled back. He poured me a glass of water. "Good," he said. "Because we have things to discuss. Happy things." "Oh." I raised an eyebrow. "The money," Mark said. "From the settlement. The money your grandmother left you. It hit our account this morning." I stiffened. "I don't want it, Mark. It feels tainted. It feels like them." "I know," he said. "That's why I don't think we should keep it." He pulled a brochure out of his jacket pocket and slid it across the table. It was for a technical trade school. A program for underprivileged kids who wanted to learn mechanics, carpentry, and engineering. "There are a lot of kids out there like I was," Mark said softly. "Kids with rough hands and big dreams who just need a chance. Kids who need to know that working with your hands is honorable." I looked at the brochure. Then I looked at my husband. "You want to start a scholarship?" I asked, tears springing to my eyes. "I want to start a foundation," he corrected. "The Beatrice Sterling Foundation. In your grandmother's name. Let's use the money she left you to build people up, instead of tearing them down." I started to cry. Not sad tears. Happy tears. "She would have loved that," I whispered. "I think so too," Mark said. "We often grow up believing that success looks like a shiny car, a big gate, and a heavy wallet. My parents certainly believed that. They spent their entire lives polishing the outside of the cup, while the inside was rotting away. They thought that grease on a man's hands meant he was dirty, never realizing that it's actually the cleanest money you can make, money earned through hard work, honest sweat, and service to others. It took me a long time to realize that my parents were actually the poor ones. They were poor in kindness, poor in loyalty, and poor in love. Mark, the man they mocked, was the richest man I've ever known long before he bought that skyscraper. He was rich in character. We launched the foundation last spring. Every year, we pay for 20 young mechanics to go to trade school. Every time I shake one of their rough, calloused hands, I see the future. I see dignity. I see the life my parents were too blind to value. I never spoke to my parents again after that day at the traffic light. Some might say that's cruel. Some might say I should have rolled down the window and offered them a ride. But I've learned that you cannot save people who are determined to drown in their own pride. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to keep driving. So, I have a question for you today. If you were in my position, sitting at that red light, seeing the people who betrayed you shivering in the cold, would you have stopped? Would you have offered them a hand, knowing they would likely bite it? Or would you have done what I did, and chosen your own peace? Tell me your story in the comments. I read every single one. And remember, true wealth isn't what you have in your pocket. It's who you have by your side when the car breaks down. Take care of yourselves.